Hello there. Welcome. This is My Next Big Move with Jonathan Essery and Tom Warson. Hit it. Cool. All right. We'll see how this goes.
In the show.
Yeah. So the cool thing, we're trying out StreamYard. I don't know if you've looked into these things.
No.
They have a free version, which is what, of course, we're trying. But I wanted something different that could eventually just record audio separately. And so they have an option that records audio and video locally, which we're not using right now. But that way, yeah. So you can have better quality, and then like internet connection issues and all that stuff kind of gets remediated. So I wanted to test it out. Hopefully it doesn't like bog down our conversation too much, but I was curious about it. How do you start to record these conversations where the technology isn't like getting in the way? That's what I want to find. Yeah. And like kind of like work through with you. So anyway, hopefully that's all right. Just kind of threw it at you.
I started, I'll drop it in our little chat. I made a copy of our big jam from last time.
Oh, nice. An episode 2 now?
Put a big box around episode 1, and then, cool. That way we know where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked that. I mentioned, like, oh, shoot. Okay, let me go. I mentioned cleaning it up, and when I went to go look at it, I was like, why? Why would I clean this up?
Yeah.
It's kind of a beautiful mess,
Right? Yeah. It's, there's probably some like little, grammatical things that might make it easier to...
Who cares about that?
To understand, but like, yeah.
I think like when you're brainstorming though, like you do your best, but it's not there for like grammatical things.
Ultimately it's like having enough there to know like, what was I thinking about here?
Yeah, what was that?
Sometimes we'll write like a little note down and it'll be like, what was I? What? I have a notebook. I have a bunch of notebooks, but like I have just a gray one that's my scratch notebook. And I started this years ago. It's like a way of brain dumping, writing down something that I can file away for later, little ideas and stuff like that. That way I can carry something that's like very low lift. Almost like a
moleskin. I didn't see it.
Yeah. This one's a moleskin. Yeah.
Good. I love
something as like almost like a drop off, like, okay, I'll put it in there, scratch it in there. And then later on, like I have other notebooks for ideas or like projects that I'm working on or like books that I've read and the notes that I took while reading the book, so then I can take what I have in there and just say like, okay, yeah, that thing, I'm going to pull that out and go transfer it to this other notebook and expand on it. But
that's interesting.
So often I'll reach into my scratch book and I'll just be like, what was I talking about?
I do the same thing, man. Yeah. Like for whatever reason, the way my brain works, it's just like, ooh, let me jot that down. Like if I didn't have a notebook or some other like way to express those things, I'd be the weirdo with a bunch of Post-its in his house, which is like little like that just looks like you're obsessive about something. And that's basically what that's what these sort of canvas.
I'm gonna go back to the future, Marty.
Like like some version of Memento. Seeing your mind. But that's I don't know, that's just what I like about these sort of like canvas tools, like Figma, Miro, Mural, all of those things. And that's what we're moving towards too, I've noticed. COVID definitely catalyzed that because the need for collaboration is sort of like free form, brainstorming or storytelling or ways to structure the thoughts in your head in a way to communicate clearly to somebody else.
I think so many discovery sessions are starting to feel like that. and I think it's good. Like I'm taking notes. Yeah, we're moving towards a much more like collaborative environment. And I think there's something really interesting about that as far as like the agile piece.
Yeah.
And
For delivery, organizing those teams.
yeah, I mean, you know, so even sitting in staffing right now, you know, looking at the way that we solution our engagements, like they're still phased. You know, and I don't know if it's because we are matching our execution or our delivery towards like what the industry expects in order for them to have something palatable. Or whether it's just because like that's what like we're used to as well. But it's still very phased. We have an initial discovery phase, and we bring in our designers, and then we have sort of an architecture phase depending on the size of the project, and then you know we actually bring on devs, and then we start doing testing. And like I haven't started it, but I'm trying to read that book Sprint.
Okay.
You know, build something in 5 days. And but like or listening to the Arguing Agile podcast, you know, where they're basically just like, is what you're doing really agile, or is it like just waterfall but by any other name, right?
Yeah.
And
the podcast, I haven't listened to that. I haven't heard that.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's these two guys who talk about you know, all the things that they run into, and yeah, it's really good. But yeah, you know, like when I was working on Pulse 2 with John Larimore here at Dialexa,
yeah,
I found myself always being like, I always need a designer, I always need somebody coding something, you know, like one of the things from the Arguing Agile podcast is they're like, you shouldn't have a backlog that's bigger than like 2 to 3 months worth of work. If you have this crazy idea for something and you want to throw it in the backlog, like, but you're not going to get it done, you know, if it's on like some 1 year long feature roadmap, you should throw it out, because you're going to anchor yourself to that, like, you know, this psychological thing of you're going to keep holding that idea.
One of the things that has to get done, even if
we're trying to do this and it's so
obliterated by something else before.
And you'll forget that you need to go back to your users or whoever and like actually validate whether that's something that they still want.
Yeah.
You know, so it's sort of like the value of what's needed will always bring itself to the surface, you know, in the near term. And that's what you should be working on.
Yeah. That's where that, like, I liked when I came across the cone of uncertainty, where it starts to try and like frame up like why that is the case and what you should do. Because it's like, you don't know. You don't know. No one knows. Like even these like trend reports, and I'm working on like some impact reports to try and like unpack some of the unknown things out there. And it's, you know, it's difficult because there's so many moving variables, especially today, that you don't know. You have to be able to shift gears, and that's what agile was all about. It was saying like, don't hold me to a document, right? Like, hey, business, like don't hold me to a document. Things will change, and I have to change with it. You have to change with it. And I think, you know, leadership is turning on to that point. And I think that's what the product, you know, the way of thinking about digital software and applications and services is turning into a product and a product mindset. And I think you mentioned earlier, like it's still kind of phased, and to type back to that, like my understanding of that was clearly from like design thinking, right? And like a clear sort of like framework that arose from the way that you create something from nothing and then deliver that to someone who wants to pay for it, let's say, or has a value for it. It's like, okay, well, here's what you're going to get along the way. And we do that in architecture. So small story. It's not really a story. It's just like, it's always been interesting to me. So you go through architecture, you know, college and university, and they have like the typical, like every year you have a studio session where it's like, it's the biggest thing. It's like 5-hour course every semester.
Yeah.
And the whole point of that is to go through like design exercises and learn to think about like how different elements come together, and you think about all the different like ways of designing something and how to make that make sense, and then you get ridiculed for it after presenting it and all your hard work, and then you learn from that process, right? So you grow a thick skin through all of that. Yeah. And so it's great, right, to a degree. So you come out and you go into the field, and I worked for a global architecture firm, but mostly like on the research side of it. So I didn't really have to get stuck to delivering projects, which was nice. I could actually focus on like deeper dives and understanding the impact of what we design.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is like then operating at that level, all of a sudden, like the way that I saw, at least, this is my perception of that, leadership take on how they sort of like coagulated around a way of thinking, around like design thinking. And so now all of a sudden, like design thinking as a term and as a framework and as a way to deliver things was like the hot new thing. Like IDEO came out with this way of like, crystallizing that. And then so like I remember learning this, and like they drew it out, and I was like, that's just design. Like that.
Yeah.
That's just what we do. Like I don't understand why this isn't new. Like, granted, it's packaged in a very beautiful way that now all of a sudden people who don't come from a design background can understand it. But I just sat there like scratching my head, like, why are we all over this? I don't get it. Like, I don't. And I think that was also some of my ignorance of not knowing like what the market values and like understanding the value of something.
Yeah.
So I see like the product delivery or product mindset as an evolution built on that sort of way of thinking, of design thinking. So
yeah. No, and also just thinking about like how some of these. I mean, you're also talking about like change management and transformation change, right? And like I forget what I was listening to, but it's that common thing of like you're saying. Some leader, some executive goes to a conference and here's a presentation on, like this great new way of doing things. Like,
which hopefully that would be me.
Oh, now we've got, hey, agile. Well, now we've got safe. We've got the scalable agile, and they come back from this conference and they just tell everybody in the company, like, we're doing safe now. Like this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wait, what? Like, have you trained your middle managers on this? Have you like just this sweeping statement, and it's like, do you really understand the value add of this thing? And do you understand the organic and iterative nature that needs to be taken on in order to make that change like something that's actually useful? We struggled with this I think about this with Deloitte. We were on I'm trying to decide whether I should say actual project names or not, but
no, let's anonymize.
Those things. With a large financial services consulting company. But anyway, I mean, we were working on a product that was within, like, it was with a handful of other products, and we were using Azure DevOps as our, ticketing and pipeline sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in Azure DevOps, you can set it up using a couple of different templates, whether you are doing Agile or Scrum or I think they have like Safe or something like that. And it does certain things, like it changes it from features to stories or something, or user stories to tasks or whatever. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the Deloitte like IT department had more or less like kind of locked down the structuring of the software projects within like this domain server that we were using. Is to the point where it was very inflexible for us to be able to say like, well, I need to I need to add a new like a custom field to our user story tickets, because in addition to the standard acceptance criteria, description, design, or something like that, we also maybe needed to add like, a region that we were developing for, or the persona that we were, it was like, but we couldn't do any of that. We couldn't organically like use what we needed in order to deliver, because this higher level organization was being governed by this, thing that said like, okay, yeah, we're doing safe now, and everything has to be based off of safe, and we're going to lock it down in order to standardize, govern, sort of thing. And so it was just like, this is really this hampers our ability to deliver. But
and deliver like the quality of product that they might actually value.
But I will
maybe even something they didn't see that they needed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I will be my own devil's advocate here, though. In that I can also see, the types of products or clients that Deloitte has. They need security and governance and compliance and everything like that. So if you start adding a bunch of like custom things to a ticket, now all of a sudden you're tracking it. Now all of a sudden you're creating an audit field or an auditable record. Now all of a sudden, is there some sort of legal liability around the information that you're generating? So, there's an extra process that says like, well, I need to add, region that I'm developing for, that this feature needs to apply to a certain region, so that we can tell the folks in that region, here's your new feature.
Yeah.
IT. Excuse me. What's the implication for the other regions? Stuff like that. Like, so there is a certain amount of like extra thinking to take into consideration, but I don't know. I don't feel like that's something that needs to like just put the total brakes or block on how you deliver.
Yeah. It's a tough balance, and that's what I've seen at the enterprise level, especially, right? Like, I don't think startups really deal with that.
Yeah.
But definitely for an enterprise, it's tough because you have to think, and this is where like my sort of fusionist way of looking at things, you have to think with an understanding of the systems at play. If you can't do that, like, you're not really gonna, if you're going for some sort of change management, it's not really gonna stick, even if you enforce it from the top down, because you don't understand the behavior of your people. You don't understand what they value. You don't know, kind of like, you have to know like why things are the way they are currently to then understand how to improve them. So you have to understand all of those systems.
Yeah.
And nowadays, like, a CEO isn't going to be an expert in all of those things, right? That's not their job. They hired other people to be experts. And so now it's all about communication, right, within that enterprise. And so that's where I'm learning more about change management and change management sort of like styles and techniques, and certainly at that level, bit by bit. I'm not like taking a master course or anything, but I am sort of like taking notes, right, as I'm interacting with my client, and realizing really it's all it's not really a dog and pony show, but it sort of feels like it has to be curated in a little bit. You have to understand your audience, and I always heard that, kind of got to know your audience, is certainly in learning like how to pitch things, or if you're giving a presentation or anything like that. And so now I'm like, oh, you do really have to understand the other side to know like what they're going to actually capture. That's interesting. So that also is maybe a small segue to something that I recently learned that I wanted to share with you, that ties back to what we sort of talked about last time, and that, I think we were talking about reading and how tough it is to read books or something, and the benefit of breaking things down into digestible chunks, which I am not good at. My wife tells me all the time, you should make that more digestible. And I'm like, I don't know. It's a, perfectly good sentence. What do you mean?
Yeah.
But I learned this recently, and that's that, the average human brain can only retain 10% of what they hear, which is wild. So like you and I will only take away 10% of what we talk about,
Mm.
20% of what they read, which is better, but like still a fifth, one out of every 5 words is what you retain.
Yeah.
And then a significant of 80% of what it sees, right? Like those are like the strongest visual, like sensory receptors that we have, that our brains have like dialed in to, like, I need to take in as much as I can of what it actually sees. And I just found that sort of like statistic very, very interesting when it comes to like communication and ways of packaging information for delivery. And so like if we're on this journey of figuring out like what our next move is and understanding like how we got here, I think that's where frameworks, I think that's why they're so powerful personally, because all of a sudden you don't have to like read through, synthesize, conceive what that is, and then like retain it, because odds are that's not going to be very successful. Some people are really, really good at that, right? Like Bill Gates like reads a whole book and like just retains it. Like, and they can write a number of books on his own, and he can read multiple at a time. Like that's insane. But the average person doesn't do that, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm a huge advocate for visual frameworks and representation, because it creates a construct in your mind that you can sort of like mentally see. So you recall back to that. What is this? And that's where, like, you know, the design thinking framework is the same thing. Sort of like the double diamond approach that it's been represented, and things like that. But I don't know. I just thought that was interesting that, you know, it's so important to have visuals because that's the way our brains have already developed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do it in a way that is clearly communicating a singular concept or something meaningful, that they're going to retain most of what is represented there. I also think that's the appeal of like infographics, and trying to share that stuff visually.
Yeah.
Anyway, small thing to big impact.
So
your head is going somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So first off, very interesting, right? To hear that and see that. Second off, this is like I won't say skeptic in me, but the digger in me that says like, okay, I don't know that I've ever really heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
To summarize how the brain works in such a like delightfully succinct 10%, 20%, 80%. Where did that come?
Yeah.
Like where's the, you know, what happened there? And I found an article for the Association of Talent Development.
Ooh.
And I'm not trying to like poo-poo on your thing, right?
I was skeptical too. I went digging and I was like, where is the? I was also looking for other things and came across.
Yeah. And so, you know, I this seems to be, just glancing through this article, it seems to have roots in Edgar Dale's cone of experience, apparently. But there isn't any research that supports like the actual numbers. But the cone is still a real thing. And I'm trying to, let's see. I mean, I'd have to look at like Edgar Dale's cone of experience. But I think this is really interesting because, let's see, Edgar Dale cone experience. Reading, hearing, viewing, versus like things that are defined. Yeah. So this article is basically making the argument between the things that you are passively learning versus the things that you're actively learning. And my see if this there goes. So I think this is interesting because to me, this taps into more of like my understanding of the human, like the evolution of the human brain, and you know, our brains being I mean they're machine learning things, right? We're looking for patterns.
Yeah, we built
our
that off
brains
of
are
like
always
neural network concept. So
yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Like our brains are always looking for patterns, and
yes.
which makes sense, right? Our early ancestors saying like, oh, if I, put my hand in the fire and that hurts, and I put my hand in the fire again and it hurts again, oh, I should probably stop putting my hand in the fire because pattern tells me how to,
He's
learn.
gonna keep
Right.
doing that. Yeah.
Little
Like,
kids. I mean, I would be curious to hear how your thoughts on, your child
yeah.
coming up. They're
Yeah.
just little experiment centers that are just constantly,
All the time.
they're little scientists that are running
Mhm.
experiments on the world and saying, does this happen every time I do this thing? Like, that's why they
Yeah.
keep saying again,
What
again,
happened?
because
Yeah.
they want to know, if I do this every time, do I get the same result or do I get a
Mm-hmm.
different and leveraging the way that our brain has, extrapolate that out into
Yeah.
like trauma and everything, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
the way that, oh, if I do this thing, then someone's not going to love me because that's what happened to me when I was a child or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could say the same for business. Like I've seen
Yeah.
plenty business trauma where how many clients have you had that, hammer you on something and you're like, man, why are they giving me such a hard time about this thing? And it's like, well, probably because a contractor or a vendor screwed them over previously and they got in trouble for it, and they will never let that happen to them ever
Yeah.
again. But anyway, so applying the cone of experience stuff, passive learning seems to be that, like, just comparing what's happening to your current model, to your current patterns in your brain, it's what I'm seeing consistent with what I already know. There's that thing with like, you can rearrange all the letters within a word, but as long as the first word or the first letter and the last letter are, correct,
The same. Yeah.
you'll know what word it is.
Yeah.
Because your brain has a pattern and it says, I'm evaluating this. This is close to the pattern. I know what that is. That feels like this passive part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the active part feels like more of that, okay, I'm challenging my mental like patterns. I'm having to say, okay, this doesn't fit into a pattern that I know. I can't be passive about it. I have to activate a different part of my brain in order to say what's happening here. And which is why you're analyzing, you're taking action, you're basically running a science experiment on your own brain, or your brain is running a science experiment on the world to say, okay, we've got to form a hypothesis of what we think this looks like, but we don't know the results until we actually run the test.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think applying this to like agile and product type stuff is, when we think about like change management and all that kind of stuff, like it's let's forget change management. I'm just looking at the other sticky and being like, how can I
tie it back to that?
That's okay. We don't have to.
Maybe it doesn't.
But more to what you're saying of like, how do we retain something? And I think it's like we have to integrate that thing into like something active that either challenges our patterns or does something in an active way to like reinforce our patterns, like our brain patterns.
I think that also helps verify a little bit and maybe
keep talking,
clarify like the value a bit more as well, right? Like, so if we look at that's interesting. If you look at like this breakdown of what of learning percentages, like the most valuable things that people, let's just say, are paying for or have paid for or do pay for are the interactive pieces that you're seeing at the lower part of this cone, right? Like participating in workshops. Like we do that all the time. And sometimes that's the most valuable thing that a client can do. And they don't realize it. And maybe they haven't had the expertise that we bring to the table to curate that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like that is what we can help get to the point where they can define and evaluate and create on their own, because that they didn't see it before, right? And so walking them through that, and then if you get them to actually participate, right, the doing part, the most thing that people can do, most information they remember is by interacting in that workshop, then like that's like the gold ring we reach out for on every time with every client, let's say. Why that's so important. And it's interesting though that like read, hear, and view images, those are like the beginning of social media, if you recall. Like that was the the big boom was like all of a sudden my digital community like my sense of community expanded digitally, and I could with MySpace read what other people were putting out there, hear the music that they were making more quickly, and view whatever images they were posting online. And then Facebook sort of like encapsulated that in something that all of a sudden that experience was a bit more obtainable, easier to like smaller learning curve, and everything was kind of like just produced for you. And so you sort of like, we got used to those sorts of things, and now like video and short form video, right, has kind of like taken on. And we have like learning courses and like other things that are kind of like capturing shops and stuff like that. I think that's a whole big sector, if you will, of thinking about those things. But it's just interesting that our appetite for that type of sensory experience in the digital world is kind of gone haywire. And it's interesting to like, maybe we're just addicted because we don't retain that enough of what we're doing, that we just keep coming back for more,
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's, this is a oversimplification, but when I look at this and I see, passive and active, I also can draw a delineation between consuming and creating, right?
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, that's true.
It's really hard to walk into a room with people and say, let's start creating, because that requires energy, focus, time, context, like stop thinking about whatever it is that, the emails that are coming in and what you need to do at home and everything. Like, I need you to be here and help me start creating, right?
Yeah.
Consuming is easy. There's no lift to consuming. But that makes sense why like you can scroll through 100 TikToks before you go to bed and you don't remember any of them the next day.
Any of it.
Because you're just like, okay, yep, that fits something. You're not being actively challenged and you're not engaging in the creation of that thing either.
Yeah. And your brain is going like, okay, this isn't useful. This isn't useful. Like I got no room to put this. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, that's interesting. Let me reconfigure this other thought based off of that one little thing I saw, and then get rid of the rest,
Well, and I find that the things that I find interesting, I will like write something down about it. I'll pull out my scratch notebook and I'll write down, like, yeah, Veritasium wrote this thing about the speed of light, and that was really interesting.
Yeah.
In the act of writing it down makes me like remember it more, or it was just like significantly profound. And I was like, wait, my whole worldview just got challenged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson does that for me. It's like, oh my gosh, yes. Why haven't I known that?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's right there in front of me.
Yeah. But what's never done that for me? Watching someone do a dance on TikTok. No offense to those people who are doing that.
Yeah.
For that.
Which is fine. They're getting something out of it because they're doing, right? Like they're engaging. And
yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. So I also wanted to share, I like some of the things we talked about, we try to set up for next time. We probably won't get to all of these.
Yeah, I wanted you to. I saw what you put here about becoming a fusionist, and your awesome title on this
I'm gonna get you one.
Come up with your own. So, I wanted you to take a chance to talk more about becoming a fusionist and
so
this this journey that you're on a little bit.
So I a while back, so I've been on a sort of like understand who I am, what my value is kind of journey for I don't know over 5 years now. Of like trying to
Mm-hmm.
like synthesize so that part of what we talk about getting from there to here, like I've been doing that
Mm-hmm.
for at least half a decade, and there you can look back, and you probably have some of these. You can look back in that journey and you see certain milestones, certain like forks in the road that you were going one way and something you learned clicked in it, pivoted you and shifted your direction towards something closer to what you kind of feel like you do, or like what resonates more closely with you. And so through a series of those things of like soul searching, if you will, um, I came across this term before this even of multi-potentialite.
Mm-hmm.
And I like really big words. I like fancy words. Something just in that was like, oh, I love that. What is a multi-potentialite? And so someone described them as the types of people that have a wide variety of interests, can like almost go into any discipline and do something useful within that discipline, but like get kind of bored because they've learned it. They've learned all the like conceptual pieces and they like the learning part, and then they move on to some other topic, some other discipline.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I've been looking for a word, a way to describe that part of me for like since I was born, it feels like.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
I don't know why I do that. I couldn't figure out like what the benefit of that was, and now it's like like multi potentialites unite sort of thing, and
Yeah.
like I start looking, and there's not really a community of people that organize around that a little bit. But
Yeah.
in that search, all of a sudden, I came across Asta Roseway. She's a principal research designer now at Microsoft, and
Yeah.
she's a self-proclaimed fusionist. And so that was sort of like the next evolution. If you think about what I was starting to sort of put it together this way of my current understanding of this sort of like journey of from there to here and where I'm at, and kind of like how I start to understand what my value might be on a team, a company, client, whatever it might be. And so she calls it out as being a fusionist, and that is someone, the way that she describes it here is you take sort of like disparate things like art and design and science and technology, and you find like interesting ways that they come together, a way that they fuse together, a way that they influence something that you hadn't really thought of before. So like you almost like play with the paradigms within different industries or disciplines or ways of thought, that now all of a sudden like create interesting innovations within one particular discipline or within a company like Microsoft and what she does. And it's a way to sorry, I just got disrupted. It's a way to that my brain also thinks, right? It like
Yeah.
I kind of like gobble up all these different ways of thinking, and it's one way to think about the value of bringing all of those pieces together. And so it's always something that like you get on a team or you're working with a client in a particular discipline, and you kind of get up to speed on their market and like what their objectives are. And then all of a sudden, like you're able to bring something from like complete left field, like my architecture background or playing golf or the way that you understand the science behind certain things that have momentum, and that sort of like curates your style of communicating to a certain team, and all of a sudden they get it in a different way, and then they start to find momentum for themselves, and then like all of those things have an influence in the way that you can package it up. Sometimes it's a deliverable that's unique, sometimes it's just getting people to align in a way where they hadn't done so before, and they feel sort of like reinvigorated and bring clarity to maybe some complex ideas as well. Like it kind of helps me navigate that. So
it's almost like using complexity to find to create simplicity.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, like simplifying the complex, right? And like, so I've actually recently launched and I was going to share it with you, a newsletter that I'm calling The Fusionist. Like it all starting to come together, where I talk about like this sense making journey I have, and trying to understand and find like curated perspectives around certain topics based on how they interact with each other and how does this fuse together. And you know, it's one thing to like use that in the creative process. I think in today's world, especially with like AI now, gonna be like amplifying the echo chambers and some of the other like noise around us every day. Like I am trying to find a way to curate a clear perspective around what those things are. And I think it's going to have to be at that sort of like systems level of knowing a variety of things that are at play and their incentives and things that want to like suck my attention away. And if that's what their incentives are, it's like now all of a sudden I have to be more vigilant and I have to be equipped differently because like, you know, evolution hasn't really trained my brain yet to take that, right? So that's sort of where I'm at, where it's like, okay, I'm going to start cataloging this because the doing and writing, like we were just, you know, I want to retain more of this. So I'm going to start putting it out there so I actually grow and build on something for wherever the next move is that I'm still sort of sussing out. Yeah. So that's kind of like, I don't know, the short backstory of The Fusionist, and now it's becoming like a moniker and something I'm testing out to see as a brand. Is this something that one I can communicate? Like I told you earlier, my wife's always saying like, "Hey, can you make that more digestible?" I'm working on that part, you know. But like I'm thinking, I think that's something I can do. That's something I can be for other people. So I'm trying to figure out what that means and what that next step actually is. So
I'm writing that down. Next step is figuring out how to be a fusionist for others. To
exactly.
Is it teach? Is it explain? Is it?
You know, I think that's the value part, right?
Yeah.
Like
extracting value from this.
Well, providing value.
Value.
Yeah. So like, how can I be a fusionist to others and provide value? Like, what is that valuable thing from what I'm able to do? And that's sort of like where I'm kind of figure out. So the way I'm doing that is like through certain like research and like putting that together in an article and creating an opinion, and this newsletter basically is that too, right? It's my attempt at how do I organize myself and then hopefully one, build a community of like-minded people, because like I can't really find them and I don't know how to, there's no like concise way I found yet to talk about that. So maybe I can find that from others. But also allows me that writing and sharing and feedback loop of, you know, continuing to chisel out what this thing is and what is valuable to others. Like, I don't really know. I know it's valuable to me, but it's very different to me than it is for other people, you know? So,
I mean, I'm very curious, you know, just maybe next time we can talk through some of the, you know, your first articles and stuff. And, you know, if you've gotten feedback on them, or just kind of curious what your hypothesis is around, you know, okay, here's an example of that. Like, I did this work, I did this, you know, fusioning of these high level topics, and I'm giving it to people like this, and here's what they can get out of it, you know.
I think that would be that. I'm happy to do that. Yeah, for sure. I wasn't planning on it. But I'm happy to share, and like you can,
you know,
I can get your feedback. I think maybe I can get your feedback and tell me.
I mean, I think that's sort of the, you know, hey, this is the point of the podcast, right? Your next big move is this
exactly
right. I like
that.
Let's talk about that next big move, John.
Let's do that. And like we can sort of like put it what is that, like in the jury seat, not the jury seat, put it what is that when you're on trial? We'll just put it on trial.
Well, put it in the hot seat, the witness stand.
The hot seat. Thank you. There you go. I couldn't.
The witness stand. Yeah.
and just see how it holds up. Well, cool, man. I appreciate that. I'm happy to do that. Let's carve out some time next time. And,
Yeah.
What else do you want to talk about next time?
See, next time.
You know what I would really like to talk about?
What would you like
You
to
mentioned complexity theory before.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have some examples of what that is? And maybe we can unpack that a little bit, because I'm very interested if that's a thing, at what it is.
Yeah.
I haven't actually looked it up yet. So
Yeah.
well, I gotta go. I got the little one here.
No worries, dude. Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, should I tease something about that now, or should I? But we'll come back to it next time.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm gonna start talking about it, and we'll be here for another.
It will be for another 30 minutes. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about my next big move, and then I'm going to learn more about complexity theory and see what you're able to bring to that.
Yeah, cool.
What perspective you can bring to that for me.
Awesome.
Hey, man. Well, cool.
Sweet, dude.
Fun.
As always.
Yeah, as always. I look forward to it every week now.
I know, right? Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's good. Cool, man. All right,
buddy. Talk to you next time.
See you, Tom.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to My Next Big Move. I'm Jonathan Essery with Tom Morrison. We'll see you next time.